South Africa.
Welcome back, and indeed we are staying with SANZAF because this is a topic that's close to my heart, and especially in Ramadan, the focus on Zakat. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. In the Quran, it's mentioned more than 70 times where it says Aqimus salat wa atuz zakat, where Allah Ta'ala says establish salah and pay zakat. In there's several hadith, in one of the one that Hasanu wakum biz zakat, fortify and protect your wealth with zakat. Zakat is our third pillar of Islam, that after salah, and as I mentioned, more than 70 times it linked. That is the importance of fulfilling this important third pillar of Islam, of our deen. And most people pay their zakat in Ramadan because rewards are multiplied and amplified in this month here. And for me, zakat is a way of not only, we talk about, for those in the financial field, they say income wealth protector, but zakat is your wealth protector. So I'm going to be inviting a kindred sister who I've just connected. Allah brought us together. They say if you're together in Jannah, then when you meet on earth, it's like you knew people forever and you have so much to talk about, and you just have this connection because we come from that Alama Arwa, and such a sister I'd had the pleasure of meeting, but I feel like I knew her forever. So maybe, alhamdulillah, our souls were together there. And that is Sister Yasmina Francke, and she is the CEO of the South African National Zakah Fund, SANZAF, and she and another kindred sister, Sister Fayrouz, had got me thinking about the importance of zakat and how much does Mariam Mia know actually about zakat. So I attended the Empowering Zakah workshop. It was insightful, and also it was enlightening. And Sister Yasmina, before I officially welcome you, that's where I got the name for my show, Afternoon Enlightenment. It was because I was enlightened by the very zakat workshop and then I felt I need this program to enlighten all the other listeners and to empower and educate them regarding zakat. Ahlan wa sahlan, a warm welcome to our studios here in Johannesburg, Gauteng, to you sitting in Cape Town. Not sure where your offices are you're sitting, but you can tell us assalamu alaikum and welcome to Salam Media.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran, Sister Mariam, for such a beautiful and warm introduction. Yes, it was good meeting you, and inshallah we'll have more opportunities to connect in the future. So, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, rabbi sharah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So I'm going to jump straight into it, just in the interest of time. There is so much when it comes to the topic of zakah that we can talk about. So I think for the purpose of just making best use of the time, we're very happy to be in this arrangement with Salam Media. During the month of Ramadan, we are going to go through a zakah education series in the month of Ramadan. There'll be 4 weeks that we will, on a Monday, this exact same time, where we will be sharing with you. And as Sister Mariam said, I will be taking you through some concepts in this week and then next week, inshallah. And then in the 3rd and the 4th week of Ramadan, our national chairperson, Fayrouz Mohammed, will also do some of the other topics relating to zakah, which I think is an important conversation to have now in the month of Ramadan. So I know there's some slides that we have just to kind of give us some structure and flow to the presentation. So the first thing I'm wanting just to do is to touch on a little bit of the content of what we're wanting to talk about. So in this particular slide, I'm going to focus on 4 things. I'm just, by way of introduction, just going to contextualize zakah in the Islamic finance ecosystem. And then importantly, speak about what is the importance of the zakah, maqasid of zakah, and the fiqh of zakah. So much of this is known to our listeners, but as they say, that reminders are always good for the believers. So We will go through these topics, and we remember much of this have been taught to us either through our own readings or when we were in madrasa. But inshallah, this serves also as a reminder as we go through the slides. So I want to talk a little bit first about the context of zakah. So SANZAF has, alhamdulillah, been able to add our voice to the conversation around where zakah fits into the broader Islamic finance ecosystem. And what you see here is just some of the articles that we've written. We've also been on webinars. And so it's important that we continue to build this understanding of zakah not being a standalone model, but that it fits into a broader ecosystem. So if we look to the next slide, we looked at the architecture of the Islamic economic system. So if you look at that, there is a dual role. In the first instance, there is the satisfying of the individual's needs, but there's also the satisfying of the needs of the society. And that is done through the effective circulation of wealth, primarily and firstly, in terms of obeying the commands of Allah Almighty. So the first primary objective of this system is to assert the Deen of Islam, and to do it in a way that we show obedience to the Almighty, and also in a way that we encourage that sense of brotherhood and that sense of unity within Islam. And then the secondary motive is that economic reform that feeds into the notion of social justice and dignity for all Muslims. So that, in essence, is just a bit of the context of how the Islamic finance system is structured in a way, and then how we then from zakah feeds into that objective. So if we go here, we see that from an Islamic finance perspective, there's two aspects. There is the Islamic commercial finance, and then there's the Islamic social finance. So zakah sits in the second aspect of Islamic social finance. But just to quickly go to Islamic commercial finance, is just to mention this incorporates various contracts and financial agreements. And we know a lot of this from the growth of Islamic finance in South Africa as well. You get the various financial agreements and arrangements, some things like your cost plus sales, which is a murabaha, or we speak about forward sales agreement, which is salam, or it can be istisna, leasing agreement, which is ijara. So that is one part of the concept of Islamic finance. But then there is also the Islamic social finance. So I'd like to speak a bit about the Islamic social finance aspect of that, because this is where zakah fits in. So in my next slide, I quickly just go through three components of Islamic social finance. So we have what we all know to be the traditional charity and philanthropy, which is zakah, sadaqah, waqaf. Then we also have cooperative agreement, which is to some extent your qard hasan, which is loans to some extent without collateral, loans where the borrower is bound to repay an equivalent replacement value or an amount to the lender. And then on the other hand, the modern forms of Islamic finance that also helps social issues, which would be your Islamic microfinance, your sukuks in terms of infrastructure development, and then takaful being that cooperative system of reimbursement based on the principle of mutuality, something which is the Sharia alternative to insurance. And all of these, that forms part of the Islamic social finance, has a common objective of solving society challenges. So I think that is just to provide a bit of context. So if we now go to what is the importance therefore of zakah, and we hone in now specifically on this particular pillar of Islam. And you beautifully mentioned in your introduction, Mariam, that this is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And when we think about a pillar, and this helps our understanding of why this pillar is so important. Our deen is based on 5 pillars, from the first one, which is our tawheed, our worshipping the Almighty and submitting to His will, and then our salah and our fasting and our zakah and our hajj. we know that each one of those pillars have a role to play in upholding our deen, in upholding our iman. So in other words, if you look to a building and you're thinking about one pillar being slightly off or being fragile or is about to give in, the potential is that entire building has the possibility of coming crashing down. So I think, therefore, when we use that analogy, we need to treat every single pillar of our deen with equal importance so that we can be firm in our iman and firm in our faith. So zakah is one of those pillars, and it lives alongside our salah. As you said, it is often mentioned next to salah in the Quran to express that importance that the two works well in hand in terms of strengthening your iman, and it is regular acts of ibadah. Which brings me to my second point. Zakah being that act of ibadah, similarly to salah and fasting, as well as the hajj, if you're able to do so once in your lifetime. And that is all about us using zakah to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are submitting to his injunctions, to his instructions, because he has developed this model. And we know and we see the power of zakah and what it can do. So we understand the purpose of zakah and we implement on that particular model. Zakah is also an expression of gratitude. And here we're expressing our appreciation and our gratitude and our contentment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his blessings, for his ni'mah, for his rahmah, and for granting us that which we have in our possession. So he could very easily take that away from us, but he has entrusted us with some wealth. And our expression of gratitude is also to show that we will dispose of this wealth in the manner in which he has ordained for us in the Quran, and in which we have seen in the actions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then also the purpose of zakah, there's 3 points I'd like to make. So the purpose of zakah is a means of spiritual purification. So when we talk about spiritual purification, zakah purifies your soul because it removes greed and it removes selfishness from one's heart. And when you give from your wealth, it does require some strength, and therefore practicing the giving of your wealth to those who do not have, it strengthens the donor or the muzaki's integrity and own character, and helps also therefore to build empathy and sympathy for the poor and the needy, inshallah. And also therefore it is not just purifying your spiritual sense, it's also there to purify your wealth. Because Allah says in Surah Tawbah, the 9th surah of the Quran, in verse 103, there's an instruction which he gives to our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says in that instruction, "Khudh min amwalihim sadaqatan tutahhirum." He says, take from their wealth to purify and increase it. So it is an instruction that we take in order to purify. And also another purpose of zakah is to develop that relationship between the giver and the recipient. And that is where there is no one more superior to the other, because we need the recipient to be able to fulfill on our zakah obligation. So if there is a giver that considers the situation of the receiver, there would be a relationship built between them, and that is where we talk to the brotherhood and the love in deen for each other. And then finally on the slide, sorry, I can't drink water, so please bear with me. So finally, either some of the importance of zakah, we talk to the role that zakah play in the Islamic economy. So we know that zakah discourages hoarding, because if you're going to pay zakah on money in a shoebox, then your money will more than likely be depleted over years. So it encourages you to take that money and put that money to good use so that it grows and you are able to every year pay zakah, and that your zakah that you pay also is a bigger amount every year. So inshallah, it encourages giving, but also it regulates the flow of money in the system. And that's very important for any economy to thrive, because more people are able to consume, and it seeks therefore to bring about an equilibrium, and it bring about stability in a population, and that's good for any economy. So that in essence is the importance of zakah. So I have two more slides that I'd like to just work through quickly. The first one is the maqasid of zakah. So what is the objective of zakah? And the ultimate objective of zakah is to transform the life of the beneficiary. So for us, it is to turn the mustahik into a muzaki. So in other words, the zakah receiver becomes the zakah payer, inshallah. But how do we do that? And that brings me to the second point on the slide, which is zakah must be used as a development tool. So we talk about zakah not being a handout, but more a hand up. And through a structured program, we can achieve, this old adage that we always learn, but it is so relevant. It says that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, then you will be feeding him for a lifetime. Because in that way, he becomes self-sufficient. But more than self-sufficient, he would be able to, at some point, catch sufficient fish for himself, but also to share with others that don't have. So through using zakah as a developmental tool, you're then actually providing the enablers to becoming self-sufficient. And some examples of that is when you encourage the youngsters and you help parents to get their kids into early childhood development centers and get that solid basic foundation going. When you do skills development and training for those who aren't able to enroll themselves into whether it's vocational training or other formal training, when you assist them into obtaining access to those skills development programs, and also bursting. Students, we know the cost of education is quite expensive. If they don't have the necessary funds, it becomes difficult to some formal studies, be it university or technicon. So those are some of the things that you can help in terms of transforming the life of the recipient, who eventually becomes trained and qualified, and therefore become more employable, or not even just employable, but learn to know a particular skill and can maybe even become an entrepreneur. And then lastly, I want to quickly talk about the fiqh of zakah. So the fiqh of zakah says that in order to pay zakah, you must have an intention to pay zakah. So this is like every other act of ibadah, whether you're going to make salah, whether you're fasting, and we all know we say our intention the night before just in case, but we have an intention, we verbalize it. For Hajj as well, we verbalize. With zakah, you don't necessarily have to verbalize that you're paying your zakah, but you must make that intention. You must actually sit down and do the calculation. So the calculation is important, and your intention must be pure. You can't go and look for shortcuts, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything that He has entrusted you with in terms of your wealth categories. So you have to do the calculation. And then another important aspect of fiqh of zakah is the principle of tamlik, and that is the principle of ownership. So any person who pays their zakah, their wealth has to change ownership from themselves to the person who benefits from their zakah. So in other words, when you give your zakah, you're no longer the owner of that money, and the beneficiary has the rights over that money. The beneficiary now becomes the rightful owner, so there can be no conditions on zakah, where you pay zakah and you say to the individual, this is the zakah, and now you need to do ABC, deal with it. The minute the ownership transfers from the payer to the receiver, the payer has no rights over it, and then the receiver becomes the rightful owner. Also, linked to zakah is that it has to be paid every zakah cycle. So annually, we pay zakah, and annually in the terms of the lunar calendar. So if your zakah period is Ramadan, like you mentioned earlier, or any other month of the Islamic calendar, then you pay every year at that time. So it has its own waqt, and your waqt might be different to somebody else's waqt. And I think listeners who are questioning perhaps what I'm saying here, please tune in next week. We will also talk about the Zakah cycle, and in more detail, week 3, Sister Pedros will talk to how you calculate the whole and the nisab. And then the responsibility for the Zakah payer is that if you pay your zakah, you must be mindful that your zakah needs to be discharged correctly. So be very responsible where you pay your zakah and to whom you pay your zakah. Ensure that those who receive your zakah are eligible. And next week, inshallah, I will take you through the 8 categories of individuals who may receive zakah. And lastly, the accountability of the zakah distributor. So those who work with public funds, who collect zakah, must be responsible and accountable, and accept that responsibility that's now been given to them as an amil, and they need to report back to donors, whether it is through their financials that they publish or whether it's through newsletters. They are accountable for the money that they've collected. They need to take on that responsibility, because with that lies in somebody else's act of giving. So there's also a role, therefore, in terms of that accountability of the Zakah distributor to do Zakah education, both for the donor and for the recipient. So I think with that, sister, we've come to the close of this week's program. So I'll leave it there just to say that for next week, inshallah, we will talk about who must pay Zakah and who is not eligible to pay Zakah, but then also who can receive Zakah and who may not receive Zakah, inshallah.
Okay, before Sister Yasmina, this comes with the territory, because once we start something like this, we have more questions. I know when you present workshops, and then there's many questions. So what I'm going to do is, for the next 2 minutes, I'm just going to put some questions out there that we received as well, in some that quickly we can just touch upon the one that you said, everybody pays, you use that word waqt. So basically the time of paying zakah. So we can just do that. First of all, when a person becomes liable to pay zakah is when you have that wealth of nisab. So can we just touch a little bit about nisab,
Yes,
and then that
yes.
time frame, that full year from the time I decide, from the time I discover now I am a payer of zakat. So if you can just do that in the time period, please, because some people already, the date must have commenced if they set it for maybe the 5th of Ramadan, today being that date. So if you can just touch on that.
Yes, so I did speak about the responsibility of the zakah payer. So that responsibility starts very early on in your, call it your professional career or in your adult life. So for example, the first time you reach the nisab, now we need to be mindful that the nisab in itself is a technical aspect, but it refers to the minimum surplus net amount of wealth a person must have before he or she becomes eligible to pay zakah. And that nisab is calculated on a certain amount of grams of gold or a certain amount of grams of silver. So 87.4 grams of gold or 612.36 grams of silver. Now, because that's not the currency in which we trade nowadays, those values are converted to rand. So let's just take an example. Today, the nisab is around 8,200. So if you had just finished your studies, you've secured a job, you're a professional, let's say you're now an accountant, and you started earning money, let's say from last year, June, you started your job, and every month you earn a good salary, you put away from your salary, you use your money for your living expenses, whatever you need, but you're able to save, right? So that money that you put aside every month, that you're not touching, that you don't need for your day-to-day living, it is in excess of what you need, and you start doing like a savings account. And the minute that savings amount that you do not need, that money that you have extra, that's not your disposable income, reaches the nisab. So if you, this professional that I'm just speaking about, and you see you in the region of 8,000 every month, 1,000 or more you're saving, and you need to be mindful. That is why education is so important, because we can't think of zakah only when we older and active in the economy. It's when we're starting to enter that economic life. So that particular individual then realized nisab is around 7,500, 8,000. It fluctuates there because the value of gold and silver differs, but it kind of sits in that region and over time. So let's say that person then finds out that today I own the nisab. What they then need to do is go to the calendar and say, today is the 5th day of Ramadan, as an example. I now need to put that date down in my diary. And with our smartphones or whatever, if you put that day in today in your calendar, it will stay there. Next year, on the same date, in terms of the lunar calendar, in Ramadan, if you still have the nisab, if your savings is still above that threshold of the minimum net surplus wealth, then you become eligible to pay zakah. So you need to have held that nisab for a full 12 lunar months. So that's important for people to know. So how you start off and then your date. So for example, somebody's date will now be in Ramadan in terms of that example that I use, but not everybody started careers or started earning or started running their business at a certain time. I mean, I could be in a space now where I might be an at-home mom, but I have a side business that I just started and I'm now buying and selling goods, and my profit I'm saving. So the minute that profit, if I'm not using it, if it's net to my wealth that I use on a daily basis, it's surplus to what I need and I'm using it as a nest egg and it's sitting there, inshallah, and it's going to grow, I need to make sure that I register that date. And it may even be the 20th of Rabiul Awal. So every year, the 20th of Rabiul Awal, I need to do, first of all, check that I still hold the nisab, and then I need to pay on all categories of my wealth at that time. So for example, if at that time I had now invested in unit trust, or I have now taken out shares in a company, those then become all part of my zakatable assets, and I need to do calculation on all of that. If I have a partnership in a business, what
So,
my
Sister
partnership is.
Yasmina, me and you can go on forever because I'm so passionate about this, but let's leave the zakatable assets for, I don't know, next week or the following when we go.
So
I just want to
no, I
sort
want
out
you
the
just
nisab.
to, yes, I just wanted to say this, what I just said is a little kind of taster and a
Okay,
precursor to what Fairuz will be
lovely.
discussing in the week 3, and she'll actually take you through step by step with some supports to kind of help convey the concept, because that's quite an important concept, the nisab and the whole, inshallah, because those 4 conditions must be present because before zakah is due from
Shukran.
any
Now,
person.
I have very young uh, assistants here, that engineers, producers here, that have just entered the economic cycle. So I wanted this for them as well, to start making note of when they have reached the savings, and they
Yes.
then need to know this for nisab. So this was specifically targeted to all the youngsters, the ones that have started, they're in the kindergarten of the economic cycle, the work cycle. They
Yes.
started myself and you are now in high school, going on to university, in the economic cycle,
Absolutely.
life cycle. But I have kindergarten here, young learners, early childhood development learners here in the workforce. So this was directed for them. Shukran. I thoroughly enjoyed the segment. Shukran to yourself and SANZAF for making this available for all listeners and all categories of listeners as well, even those just starting the economic cycle. This is what I wanted to direct for them. So shukran, and looking forward to chatting to you next week, inshallah. Same time, same place, from your office in Cape Town, beaming out from our studios here in Johannesburg, Gauteng. That was Sister Yasmina Francke, CEO of SANZAF. Assalamu alaikum. We're going to take a short break, and then it's educational insights.